Computer did something weird, so hopefully everything is going well. We are going to turn to the overhead view in just a moment, and we are going to be basically working a lot with color and value today. So value is the most important um, aspect of your painting. You want to make sure that you have really good contrast. You want to make sure that you've got your shading right. And then we're going to take value and transcribe it to color. And we are going to take a pretty neutral picture and turn it into a colorful scene. So I'm going to switch to my overhead camera. And hopefully my camera is spotlighted because I'm not seeing that on my screen.
Do you see it now,
Rich,
Lindsay?
can you double check to see if my camera is spotlighted?
Your setup is spotlighted with your paints and your supplies.
Okay, I'm gonna pin it on my end because I'm seeing,
Yeah, you
um,
might just need to pin it on your end.
yeah. All right. Hopefully everybody is able to see this well. If you have questions as we're going along, Molly from Derwent is in the chat and she will relay them to me when I have a break in my teaching. Here is the photo, and what I mean about value is the darker areas versus the lighter areas. And we're going to start in with the background. And I'm going to simplify the background, which is kind of like a gardeny background with little flowers and a path. We're just going to simplify that and get some nice dark colors here. I have the Inktense pan paints, but you can use whatever you have handy. And I began by spraying this palette down before I started so that it would be ready to go. We want to have nice paint that's all activated. So I'm going to start by just using a brush, a large brush, and wetting my background. And this is going to help the paint flow because the paint's going to want to go where the paper is wet. I'm using the Derwent Inktense paper, which is a watercolor paper. You want something that's going to handle nice big washes of paint. I highly recommend you make a swatch using paper you're familiar with versus just relying on the printed swatch. This is good to hang on to because it has all your color names. So if you need to reorder a specific color you're out of, you can use that as your guide. But hand painted swatch is really the way to go to get the colors so that you know what to expect. Because like these all look really dark and it's hard to tell what you have. So I'm going to go in with this navy blue here, and I'm going to put my glasses on actually so I can read that tiny, tiny print. And I'm going to start adding that right up close to the fountain because I want there to be good contrast between the background and our subject. And the reason I'm putting this background in first is because it's a lot easier to figure out where, like, how dark and how light to go if you've got that background in. Often I see people put a background in late, and when you do that, it throws all your other values off. I'm going to put in some of this nice light green. This is called kiwi. The Inktense pan paints remind me a little bit more of gouache than a watercolor because they are a little heavier and they're not prone to flowing as much as a watercolor, but you do get them really wet. So a watercolor paper really is your best bet for a surface. We just want to get a nice dark value there. I think I might actually go in with some of the racing green as well because that's a nice dark, almost muted type of green. Just go for a mottled background. And we're going to do the same thing on the other side of the fountain. So this like band there, that would be the back of the fountain, kind of another kind of stone, neutral stone color. And if you're not sure if you've wet the paper or not, if you tip it to the light, you can see that if it's shiny, the paper's wet. If it's not shiny, if it looks dull, then you haven't wet it yet. Sometimes it can be tricky to see, especially on camera. And again, we're going to repeat those same colors. We're going in with our navy blue. And the colors will blend together because the paper is wet. Got a little bit carried away there. I'm just going to blot that area. I got it onto my design a little bit, so I'm just going to blot that off. Now the white Inktense is very opaque, so if I do need to highlight something, I can do it with the white. In fact, I like to use the white Inktense pan paints or the blocks, kind of broken up small, and I'll put them in my travel palette for where I might want to have a white opaque color on the go.
Lindsay, we have a question, and excuse my sniffling, I have a bit of a cold. Uh, can you
Sure.
use water paint or markers? Someone's asking if they can
You can
use any
use
type of
watercolor for
other.
this. Yeah, sure. This technique is probably going to transcribe better to watercolor than to markers, but values and drawing, yeah, you could definitely do that with markers. I would say use whatever you have handy, whatever's comfortable to you, whatever your favorite medium is. It'll just take a little bit longer to color in with a marker. And let's get a little, we did the kiwi, and we'll get a little bit of the racing green in there. I hope if anybody is in the path of the hurricane today that they're safe and have power. All right, we're going to paint the water here as well. We are going to get some reflections. Now we know we're going to do these kind of vibrant yellows, magentas, blues, purples. So we'll want that reflection to um, kind of be matching that. And then we'll have some of the colors from the background surrounding that. And I'm just going to go in with my flat brush. You don't have to use one this large. If you want to use a smaller one, that's totally fine. I'm not going to pre-wet the paper. I'm just going to kind of go in there and use the chisel edge, let some of the white of the paper stay unpainted. I think I'll grab a brighter blue. The mid ultramarine is a really nice one. That would be sky that we can't see because it's overhead. Just keep that chisel edge. Keep those whites. Cleaning off my brush and getting some more of the mid ultramarine. It's kind of like a periwinkle color. Rich, is my overhead camera filling the screen, or are both
Yes,
of
it
our
is.
screens on right now? It is? Okay, great.
It's just your
I swear
screens.
Zoom changes every single time I
It
do
does. It
anything
can
on
be a
it.
little funky. I'll let you know if anything crazy comes up.
Wonderful, thank you. I'm gonna grab a little bit of this. I'm gonna actually double load my brush. I'm gonna put one corner in the navy, one corner in the racing green, and I'm just gonna put a little bit of those colors back here into the water at the back. Don't worry if you lose too much white because we can go back in with the white Inktense. Now I'm going to grab some, it's a burnt yellow ochre. Throw that right on the left-hand side of the reflection. I'm gonna clean my brush off. I'm gonna grab some fuchsia. Add it towards the center and out towards the right-hand side. And take some of that fuchsia and just kind of pick it up into the navy to make a violet. And I'm just going to throw some of that in there as well. And there is our background. So what I'm going to do is actually take my heat tool and dry this. So if you have any questions as I'm drying this, please pop it in the chat, and I'll keep an eye out for it, or Rich can send it to me. The reason I'm drying the background is because I'll get fuzzy edges if I go and paint right next to the wet paper. Although this is Inktense, it's not quite as flowy as watercolor, so I won't have such a, it won't be so bad. I could go right next to the edge and it wouldn't be too bad, but you can be safe, rather safe than sorry here. All right. Now, as I look at the photo, I can see the darkest values are going to be kind of in there. There's a big kind of cup on the top of the fountain that's casting a shadow. So we've got this really dark shadow that's coming across there. We've got some dark shadows on this side of the fountain. The sun's overhead, so it's again hitting this ridge and it's casting a shadow under there. So that's where we're going to have the darkest. Our lightest colors are going to be on the left side here, where the sun is just kind of blasting it. And that is going to be represented by our burnt yellow ochre. So we're going to water that down and put that in over here. We'll be adding magenta as we get into the midtones, and then we'll be adding, you can either mix a violet, or you could use one of the violet, either the violet or the dark plum color from your palette, whichever you prefer, or you could take the magenta and mix it with the navy to get a violet that way, which I think is going to be the best bet, honestly, since we've used those colors already. So whenever you can mix a color rather than taking a new color, it's going to be better for your painting because it's going to have better harmony overall. So let's get started. I'm going to switch to a round brush because I have a little more control. I'm going to make myself a nice puddle of the burnt yellow ochre. And I'm going to begin just kind of adding it in where I see highlights. Now I actually have a highlight here on the back of this fountain ridge, showing the thickness of that edge of that fountain. So I'm going to paint that in. I'm going to, I didn't wet anything because I want to be able to control where my paint's going. A round brush will hold quite a bit of pigment, and it will give you more control than a flat. So that's why I'm using that in here. Now this color is light in value, so I will easily be able to cover it over with another color if I need to. And like that center face gets a little bit darker, so I'm just going to go around that center face. And I'm just trying to paint the areas that are going to get hit by the sun the most. So I look at my reference photo, I'm saying, okay, where am I seeing my brightest color? It's actually kind of brighter at the center. It's really light here. So I have an area that's really light. I might even go in, take a little bit of water and actually brush a little water across it, and then go in and add my color and just let it fade out a little bit if I want it to be super light. Now I do have the white Inktense, so I'm not going to worry about it too much, but if you can save yourself the time and save yourself the paint, why not? I do have both on the Derwent website and on my YouTube channel. Actually, the Derwent website's a better place to go because there are teacher resources there. And we have some lessons that we did with the graphitin pencils and statuary, and we converted it to like either single tone or several tones, kind of like this. So if you love this project, check out the resources on the Derwent website. There's and see some of those lessons on there. They were meant for high school and middle school teachers to use with their students, but the subject matter I think is very applicable to people of all ages, and I think you would enjoy them. So there's more to learn if you want to. How much of the paper you let show is completely up to you. I'm adding a little bit of water to my paint and painting the face of this fountain here. Bringing the light color over a little bit there. Now, here you can see where the paint is dry, and I'm trying to go and blend it because when the Derwent Inktense products touch the paper and dry, they become permanent. So I'm not going to lift up anything by accident. In fact, if you want to blend something, you want to blend it out right away so you don't end up with any harsh edges you don't want. All right, I think I've got my lights in pretty well. So now I'm going to go with my midtones, and I'm going to choose some magenta. And I'm going to add the magenta. I'll actually bring over my finished artwork. I think it might be a little bit easier to illustrate in the kind of in between areas. So I'm going to go in there. Well, that's a little bit bright. So I think I'll take some of, is that the color? Yeah, some of this dark plum, add it to the magenta just to make it a little bit softer. Make it a little, not really softer, but it's more neutralized. But that dark plum is quite dark, so I can actually start bringing it around to my darker areas as well. The mid ultramarine was also kind of a mid-tone color. I'm gonna take some of that and add that to some of the magenta so I can have a lighter value yet colorful color here. If I want to soften that magenta a bit, I can add a little bit of the yellow ochre to it, and that will kind of make it a little bit more of like a terracotta color. And that color is a nice bridging color between the highlight yellow where we need it. I drew these out on 2 different days, so I'm like, doesn't match my drawing very well. We'll go back to the reference photo. Putting the shadows on this face in the center with that mixed color. Again, don't worry if you lose some of your lights because we can go back in with the white. When you do projects like this, you train your eye to see the different values, how light and how dark something is. And it really forces you to think. And getting these little grooves in here. They're not super dark, but they're not super light either. And then we've got a really dark patch of, I think it's actually more mold or mildew than shadow, but it's still dark and we will put that in with the darker colors. In fact, I can do that right now. This dark band here. So I'm picking up some of that plum color off my palette and gently putting the little scallop designs that I see. Back to that mid-tone and getting in some of the darker textures and shading. I like kind of jump around a little bit. If I've got the color on my brush, then I'll jump around and use it up before I rinse it off and add something else in. All right. I think I'm gonna go in with this mid-tone here with the mid ultramarine. And go right up next to the face of this fountain right here and bring that shadow over. It helps if you squint and look at your reference image because it'll take out the details and just kind of give you chunks of shadow. Now there's like a shadow of the water that's being cast onto the fountain. So it's kind of going across the shape of the fountain. So I'm putting that in too, right there. So you kind of have to think ahead a little bit because you're putting a shadow down for something that we haven't painted yet. So I'm putting that in there. And then I'm going to take the navy, I'm going to take some of that plum and some of that magenta, and I'm going to make this nice dark color that I'm going to go in and add to my darkest area. And I like um, this stage because you're putting in your darkest darks and you're establishing your value. There's like a big kind of patch of, I don't know, might be moss, might be mildew, but I want to get that in there because it's really dark. And then we have a lot of that going up here towards the top. And again, we can put these really darks in now, and we can brush over them with a lighter value. Like you can see that's really dark, and then around it is a little bit lighter, and it's not going to disturb this color because of the Inktense properties. Again, mixing up that navy, the dark plum. That's my darkest dark. You can add some magenta in there too, if you want to. The magenta will lighten it a little bit, so it would just depend on how dark you want to go. I'm keeping this pretty loose because it's just a demonstration and we only have an hour to paint it. But if you want to take more time and be more detailed, you're more than welcome to do that, obviously. Okay, I'm gonna add a little of the mid ultramarine because it's a little bit lighter and a little bit of magenta because it's a little bit lighter. A little bit of water for flow. And I am going to start filling in the areas that we haven't painted that are going to be that kind of that stage right before the darkest dark. We also have some of this on the front of that fountain where you can kind of see here how there's like a shell that kind of curves over the face, and that's what's casting that shadow in there. And under the brow, we have some of that dark. It's not the darkest dark, but it's still pretty dark. Got a little bit around the nose. We got some on the back of that fountain head. I think I'm gonna grab a larger round though. That's kind of small to mess around with. Grab this filbert, that'll work. Grab the brush that works best for you. Mixing up some more magenta, mid ultramarine, and a little bit of the plum, not too much. And I'm just going to do a wash over this. You can use your watercolor brushes with Inktense. A lot of times, though, I prefer to use an all media brush because it's a little bit heavier than a watercolor paint. I kind of broke up my streak a little bit so I could add a little bit of detail and texture, but without going over all of that lighter tone that we mixed.
Lindsay, Lena is asking, are the Inktense paints more forgiving with water than watercolor would be?
Well, they're more forgiving in the sense that you can cover it over because it's very opaque when you use it thickly. So they're more forgiving in that respect. It really depends on what techniques you're trying to do. They're not going to flow quite as much. They're not going to lift like watercolors will lift. So if you are reliant on that technique, they're going to be less forgiving. But if you like to layer up, they're going to be much more forgiving because you can paint over a mistake. A little shadow under there. There's like a little ridge there, so I'm going to paint that in. A little bit darker here for this shadow. And I'm going to paint that fountain face over here a little bit darker. I kind of like little slices of highlight, even though they're not there, because it helps break it apart from the background. So if you see a little sparkle and you like it, don't paint over it, even though it might be an area that in the reference photo is darker. You are the artist, so you can use your artistic license to do whatever you like. A little bit darker under that chin, the darker under that chin too. And I'm going to mix up a little bit more of our color, our mid to dark tone, mid ultramarine, the magenta, a little bit of the dark plum color. My example, I did smaller and I spent a little more time than an hour on it, I think, or maybe I spent just an hour painting it, but it was smaller, so there was less real estate to cover. So if you feel like we're going fast, and don't let it stress you out. Slow down if you need to slow down. There will be the replay there. I like how, I don't know why I drew it like this, probably because I ran out of space in my paper, but I kind of like that rounded detail there. I guess that's what I have right here. Um, so I think I want to bring that back. I like that. I like that kind of having that more of a rounded detail. You don't have to do that, but I think that looks kind of nice. Just gonna kind of dab my paint on. I want this to have a little bit more of a rough texture because it is kind of stuccoed looking there. So it's gonna rough it up a little bit. Go back to that magenta plus yellow ochre color. And I'm gonna carry that design, keep going with that design. painting in the course of a time crunch or a deadline reminds me of what it's like to paint in nature when the light is changing or it might rain or something like that. So um, if you're feeling rushed, then that's you're probably ready to do some plein air painting because that's kind of how you feel when you're out plein air painting. And you kind of just go for the impression. You don't go for super detail, which is what I'm doing here. Jumping around, seeing where I need to add that same color on my brush, trying to be efficient and use an economy of brush strokes. And this is going to be very impressionistic. When you want texture, try dabbing your brush or dragging your brush or dry brushing it. Something I'll do sometimes is when my brushes doesn't have much paint on it, I might even dab off any extra and then just kind of drag it. And then the texture of the paper will take over, and I love the way that looks. Just make sure you drag your brush in the direction of the texture. Like you got this kind of like fluting going down here. So if I'm going to drag my brush, I'm going to drag it with the direction of the texture. Um, so I keep with the shape and I reinforce the shape that we're seeing. I missed a spot on his mustache there, so I'm going to go ahead and wash over that. And I'm going to let that be for a second, and I'm going to paint this area back here. I'm going to do that, I'll actually wet it because I want to blend a few colors together for some interest. I'm going to use yellow ochre first. I'm going to grab some of the mid ultramarine. And some of the magenta, but I'm going to tamp it off a little bit because it is kind of bold. And I want there to be um, a crisp edge from the corner from where the part of the fountain that's kind of facing up. It's probably even like a bench you could sit on between that and the part that's vertical. So you get a nice contrast between the vertical and horizontal. I go a little bit darker with that. I can punch the magenta in there a little bit more. Also get a contrast between the fountain and that background. And if it's too bright, just keep mixing your colors together and they will desaturate each other because we have a triad. We have red, yellow, and blue. I'll show you really quick. We have our yellow ochre. We have our magenta. And we have our mid ultramarine. So it's not your classic primary triad, but you can see we get a really beautiful purple there. We'll get kind of like a more olivey green. So that's why we used greens from the other pans of color. But it gives you a nice gray. It almost gives you like a mossy gray, which you would see on like a fountain. And then we'll get kind of like a terracotta orange color in there. So it's still a triad. And, we're kind of doing value, color theory, all of that. And we're playing and we're having a good time. Hope you guys are having a good time. And that's how we learn. You learn by playing and doing and not worrying about the outcome. Now I'm going to go a little bit darker here. Look how dark that is there. That is really getting the shadow. And that's our highlights, our water splashes are really going to show up against that. So we can go super dark there. Dark on my first example, but I think I'm going to go darker here. So it's more like the reference photo. And I'm going to go in with some of that blue, some of the magenta. So I'll use less yellow ochre because yellow ochre is my lightest color. I do want some though, because otherwise it will be just too vibrant. And I need to desaturate it a bit. And I'm going to add a little bit of that dark plum color. Another reason to swatch your colors out is that I somehow must have dropped my paints or something. I got them mixed in the wrong order. So I have my plum. I think maybe I moved a couple colors to be a little bit more logical to how I like to paint. And having a real swatch that I've made myself, I can see exactly where my colors are. So now I'm thinking, well, if that's darker, the water's going to be darker, and the water is darker over here. So I need to adjust the values there. So I'm going to go ahead and do that while I'm at it. I'm going to go in with that darker green. I'm actually going to throw it right in some of that dark mix I have on my palette. And I am going to bring that over here. Just add another layer. And I'm doing it with my round brush because I can be a little bit more nimble with that. It'd be perfectly fine to throw any of those darks in there because they could be reflecting from the edge of the fountain as well. So as long as you keep repeating your colors, chances are it's going to work. And just go, okay, how dark is that or how light is it? And let that be your guide. I think the one thing that can make a painting um, look awkward or amateurish is using too many colors. You can, if you, rather than just choosing like maybe five or six and mixing everything you need. So what I'm doing here is I'm doing smaller slivers of color to make the water look more crisp and more um, watery, I guess. And I'm going to layer up some little slivers over here too. You can go back in with your flat brush if it's easier. Sometimes it's hard to get a nice ripple with a round brush because your arm wants to arc and give you a curved line, whereas when you're using a flat brush, it's much easier to keep that straight edge. So whatever's more comfortable for you, go ahead and use it. And if you are getting curved lines, that's probably why. And I'm going to go in with some of these other colors that we've also used and just add on some more of those ripples. And when you get in front of the fountain, just look for the colors you've already used and just repeat them. So look directly up. We got the yellow, we got the pinks, we got the purples. Take them from your palette where you've already mixed them, so you don't accidentally grab the wrong color uh, out of the palette or like out of a pan, and then end up with a uh, garish color that will be difficult to mix out. If you keep mixing from the same colors, you're never going to go wrong. Even if you are a little bit wrong, it's going to look okay. And who's to say what's wrong and right in art? It's our art. We can do whatever we like. Okay. I want to brighten up some of these colors. So what I'm going to do is go into the white. Now I pre-sprayed this, so my white is ready to go. Sometimes you want to put a drop or two of water in here, maybe 5 minutes before you paint to make sure it's ready to go. And you don't have to hurt your brushes kind of digging for it. But these do soften up really well, and I wouldn't put too much water in or it will turn liquid. And I'm looking for my lightest areas here. Not the water yet. Just we're still working on the stone. We're not adding any like highlights on yet. So first, see what does this look like if I put it on my the stonework where it's the brightest and I don't mix it with anything because it might look a little too bright. And yeah, it does look a little too bright. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that white and I'm going to mix it with a yellow ochre. There, that's nice and soft. It looks really stony and stucco-y, and that's what we want to get. I'm gonna go ahead and make a good sized puddle of that. The more water you add to the white, the less opaque it's going to be. And that's fine. You don't need it to be super opaque, but this is more opaque than a white watercolor. So this would be like a semi-opaque glaze. Sometimes you'll see um like the ridge of like a decoration here altering where the shadow falls. So if you see anything like that and you want to just kind of cut in a little highlight, you can do that. All of our paintings are going to look a little bit different. So your painting might need a highlight where somebody else's doesn't. I might need a highlight where you don't. So just kind of season to taste, if you will, and put the details in that you need. And again, these aren't the brightest highlights. These are, but they are the lighter areas on the film. And some of these areas where I am putting this beigey color in, I will be going over with brighter highlights. Right, here's what I was talking about. Like sometimes your highlight will kind of creep into an area that's in shadow because there's a ridge sticking out. And this is why I don't like to use the watercolor brushes on my with my Inktense because sometimes I need to get in there with an opaque color and I really kind of have to not really dig, but I'm going to be a little bit more aggressive than I would want to be with a soft watercolor brush. So I am going to put a couple drops of water right in that pan to let it just soften up a little bit more. And I like to kind of sit back for a bit and look at it and see what I need to add. I think I'm going to go in with a half-inch flat or half-inch angle and just throw in some more darks. I'm going to, again, magenta, dark plum, mid ultramarine, and any place I feel like I need a little bit more dark, I'm going to go in and apply it. I like a flat because you can't be too fussy with it. You're not going to get too much detail. When I'm blocking in shadows, I just want to make sure I have the darks in that I need. You'd be a little bit bolder now because you've done a lot of the hard work of assigning your values. So now you can have a little more confidence to go and be like, okay, I know that's dark. I know where the light's hitting it. I can go in boldly this color now. Under here, I feel it should be a little bit darker. I can drag the brush a bit as it starts to run out of paint and get some nice texture. And drag it up around these scallops. Like a little ridge there. All right, something else I noticed is that there's some bounced highlights. So if you look kind of like in here, you look in here, the water, the light is hitting the water. So the light is coming down over the fountain, but some of the lights bouncing off the water and then reflecting up here. And then we see this almost like a bluish lighter tone in there. And I'm going to add a little bit of that in there. Actually, I'll stick with the flat brush, I think, for that. I'm going to take some of the white and some of the mid ultramarine. And it's kind of a weird highlight. It could look a little strange, but let's see. It's not super bold, and it's going to catch on the undersides of things. But it's bouncing off the light, off the water here, and bouncing up. So it's only really going to be kind of in the area where on the undersides on the left side of the picture. It's really going to show up in the shadow. It's a bounced highlight in the shadow of the left underside. All right, we're gonna do actually let's do a quick dry. If you have any questions, then go ahead and post them in the chat. If you want to do any colored pencil on this, your paper needs to be bone dry or it's just going to flatten the tooth of the paper and it's not going to leave any pigment. So you really want to make sure that paper is dry. I did some really dark shadows with some like ink blue and black colored pencils. Rich and Molly, did we have any questions pop up?
Not yet. We have a few comments. Oh, well, we just had one come in. Would you consider this a beginner, intermediate, or an advanced project?
Well, I think just the pace that we're going is kind of fast, so maybe intermediate, but I definitely think that that it, the value and the color mixing could be very beginner friendly. You just might want to watch the replay and pause as needed. I do apologize for having to speed along. Um, but I'm limited to an hour and I guess when I painted it on this smaller piece, I'm like, oh, this is going to be take no time, and then I decided to do it bigger so it would show it better on camera, and I think I underestimated the amount of time it was going to take. I've got this ivory black Derwent drawing pencil. You can see it's one of my favorites because it's getting kind of short, and I'm going to go in and I'm going to sketch in some of my darks. Now, this you will not be able to remove and it's going to be hard to paint over. So just think about that when you're putting that in. And if you're not quite here yet and ready to do that, then that's fine. You can do it later. You can watch a replay and do it, or you can look at the finished picture. But I really like this because you can bring back structure that you might have lost in the more sloppier underpainting. I like this because you can be really bold with your sketching and you can carve out those details. And by this time, where you've really been looking at your picture, because to get these values, you're going to look back and forth at your painting a lot. I mean, from your painting to the reference photo. So you're probably really feeling confident about where everything is. And you may see errors. A lot of times I'll at the stage and I'll be like, why did I draw that way? I've been looking at the reference photo now and I see that I've made a mistake. And this is the point where I can fix it. If, say, I had a detail in the wrong place or I just totally missed something, this is a great time to be able to bring back any of those details that you might have glossed over. You don't want to cover everything up though. You're just kind of going in there and throwing in a little bit of shading. This is really dark in this area underneath uh, this ridge. And this is less pronounced, so it's less shadowed. It's a little bit, just a sliver of a dark shadow. And I want a little texture, so I'm just going to use the edge of my pencil and let it just drag across the texture from the paper. And anytime I want a little bit of that texture in the shadow, I'll just drag it, like you're shading with a regular pencil. Don't be intimidated by your supplies. You bought and paid for them. The only way to waste them is to let them sit and get old on your shelf. You got to use them. You may want to sharpen your pencil. I'm going to sharpen this because you can see this is a really thick lead pencil and it goes blunt, and that's going to be way too much pigment. So I'm going to quickly sharpen it. So if you have headphones on, you might want to take them off because I have an electric one. Nice point on that. And I want to just get a little bit of detail on the fountain face. So I want to get over the nose. It's a really heavy brow here. The sun is quite dark. It's really, but if you're not feeling comfortable with your face drawing ability and you don't want to accent it, that's fine. You don't have to. I think it's kind of fun to put little details like that in. It's still very sketchy, so don't feel like you have to have a lot of detail. And I'm also going to use the edge of my pencil and just kind of swoop up some shadows. And I'm lightening my pressure as I come over because I don't want it to be as dark as I get over there. Start with more pressure on the right side and lift as I go over. Try to use the full swing of my arm to do it so it's a little bit more um, a little bit more natural looking on those larger swoops. And then where we come down and meet the water can be a little bit darker. And we can also darken up back here a little bit because that is really dark. We can bring a little of the dark over the edge. Actually, I should probably do that with the paint because that's going to be too textured. And I just want to carry that color over a little bit by just adding a little bit at the top of the fountain edge over here. Not too much, just to integrate it a bit. All right. If you felt like things got a little too bold and you want to soften the color a bit, you can grab any of your colors like this, these kind of warm, earthy yellows. Any of those are going to work great. And you can just add little bits of warmer, lighter color if you need to anywhere. Just be careful if you're putting it somewhere you think you might want to add paint on top of because paint's going to have a harder time to stick on top of the wax of the pencil. I love this for texture though. Look at the beautiful textures that we can get. I'll take a little of that ink blue. I'm going to add a little bit of rippling here into the shadow areas. All right, now I want to do a final pass of highlights. I'm actually going to use the white pencil here um, because I want the water to be the brightest highlight. So I'm just going to go in and add some highlights with the pencil. I can always add a little paint highlight if I want to, but we'll see how we look after we have the water splashes on there. I'm adding a little sliver of white over here just to help break that from the background. Kind of highlight opposite where I put the shadows, lightening my stroke as I work over and get into the darker areas. A little sliver over there. All right, now our white should be nice and ready to go. I'm going to use a smaller brush here. This is a number 1 round. We've got kind of like a paste-like consistency. And I'm going to take a deep breath and put in this stream of water coming out of the fountain's mouth. I'm just kind of dabbing and rolling my brush. A little more water in there. Now you can use a liquid gouache if you want to at this point, if you're maybe you're worried about using up your white pan paint, or you don't want to, maybe you have watercolor brushes and you're nervous about damaging them by having to dig for paint. You can always add more. So start light with the water and you can always build up if you need to. I'm also going to put some bits of foam around the edge of the fountain. And you can also put some where the water meets the background over here. I can't remember if I put a toothbrush on the supply list, but I am going to do some spattering with a toothbrush as well. But I want to get the big chunks of water in first. And I'm just holding my brush at a 90-degree angle with the paper and just kind of dabbing randomly. Think of the water falling off the top edge of the fountain, but don't try to affect it too much. Just kind of do some random dots. You're gonna have more water up top, and then it's gonna get a little bit more spaced out as it comes down. You can always go in too and just kind of tap with a white paint pen if you need a really bright white, if you don't like how white your paint is, or you want a little more control. And if at this point thinking, I wish I had a little bit more highlight on parts of the sculpture, you can go in and paint in little highlights where you think you need them, where you feel like you want that little extra sparkle. But if you start doing this, you'll have to do it in a few places. You don't want to just do it one place and call it done, even if because it's probably gonna look a little bold when you first put it in there. So spread it around a little bit. Let me get a toothbrush. So whenever I want to do like snow or anything, I take a toothbrush and I'm just gonna get it into that pan of paint. Oops, I got some other color in there. That's why I test it. I just want to get into the white. Now, a smart idea is to do this on a scrap. I'm just gonna test it up there. Oh yeah, it's fine. But I would do it on like a brown bag, something where you're not gonna worry about messing up. Dark something there. There we go. Some spattering on some splashes. Ah, the blue again. This might be a good one to do with a some whitewash. You can put it on a little plate by itself so you don't get into the other colors by accident. Using different levels of splashing depending on the brush you use. So like a soft watercolor brush will actually give you really great, like bigger splashes because it's going to hold more water. I don't know. Let me see if I can get, let me see what I can get with this one. I don't know if I can get, if it will hold enough water, but yeah, that one does pretty well. And I'm just going to put a few kind of like paths, like rows of water dripping down. Oh my goodness, we're running out of time. Let's put a couple little more details, a little more water trails, and then I will dry this and we'll take a look at how it came out. I can also throw in with a small flat brush some bright ripples in the water. I'm just gonna need a flat brush. It's really important that I have these straight. Just throw in a few. All right, let's give this a quick dry so I can take the tape off. That's another tip is when you've taped your paper down and you want to get a really nice border, if you heat up your tape with a hair dryer or a heat tool, it dries the paper, which makes the paper less likely to rip, and it also loosens up the adhesive on the tape, so it makes it more likely to come off smoothly and not mar the paper. All right. If you have any last minute questions for me, pop them in the chat. And we will remove this tape and see how it looks. And you can put other little details in, like adding some shadow to the um, to our little water streams here. I'd use the ink blue pencil or that dark navy paint that we were using. Because water is not bright white, obviously it's clear and it's just picking up the colors that are around it. So that can give you a uh, nice bit of dimension, but enjoy the process, take your time, and I hope that you enjoyed spending some time with me this afternoon. I'm going to put my camera back up and sign off here in a second. Hey, I'm back. All right, guys, how'd you do? Do you feel good? You guys want to give me some thumbs up here? Let me know how you're. Oh, look at that. Yeah, if you want to hold your paintings up, I'll scroll through and take a look at them. And Brenda looks awesome. Sandy, great job. Susan, fantastic. Patricia, that looks great. Oh my goodness, I'm gonna try to. Oh wow. Barbara, Laura, Gerald, Laura. Oh my gosh, you know what? I would love it if you guys are on Facebook or you're on Instagram, if you would tag me so I can get a better look at these beautiful artworks. You're all doing such an amazing job. Oh, wow. And we were painting fast today. That was no easy feat to try to catch up when, we're all flying along doing a project where, that's new. Oh, I'm so proud of you all. Beautiful job, guys. Oh, looks so nice. Well, thank you so much. I'm sorry I went a few minutes over today. But sometimes that's what it takes, right? Art takes time sometimes. Uh, again, you can tag me at Lindsay Wyrick. You can tag Michael Stores on Instagram. You can use a hashtag Make It With Michaels, I believe, right, Rich? Is it Make It With Michaels? Make It With Michaels. And you can tag Derwent art underscore US or Durant. We'll have it all in the chat. It's all going to be there. It's going to be easy to find. And thank you again for spending some time with me this afternoon, and I can't wait to see your work close up when you tag me. So thank you so much on behalf of Derwent and Michaels. I'm Lindsay Wyrick, and thank you for joining us. Have a great day, guys. Bye.